He didn't ask like a man who wanted an answer. He asked like a man who had already decided someone was going to regret it. I was blotting foundation over the bruise on my wrist when I heard the dining room doors swing open and the air change. You learn to feel him before you see him. The low murmur of conversation thins out. Glasses stop clinking for half a second too long. Even the piano player softens his touch like the keys suddenly matter more. Adrian Moretti never needed an announcement. At 6'2", in a charcoal suit that probably cost more than my monthly rent in Queens, he carried silence around him like it was tailored. I kept my eyes on the mirror in the staff bathroom, dabbing carefully, blending carefully, telling myself the same lie I'd been telling for months. It's nothing. It was always nothing. Just clumsy. Just tired. Just my fault for saying the wrong thing at the wrong time. The fluorescent light above me flickered, buzzing like it was nervous too. I pulled my sleeve down, checked that the purple shadow disappeared beneath fabric, and practiced a smile that didn't look rehearsed. Friday nights at Bellamy's were good for tips. Private booths. Expensive bourbon. Men who talked about real estate in numbers I couldn't imagine. I needed the shift. Needed the cash. Needed normal. When I stepped back onto the floor, the scent of seared steak and oak smoke wrapped around me. And there he was. Corner table. Back to the wall. Always the back to the wall. 3 men in tailored suits sat with him, but they weren't the ones in charge. You could tell by the way they angled their shoulders toward him, waiting for a nod before laughing. Adrian didn't laugh. He watched. His dark hair was brushed back, a thin silver watch catching the light when he lifted his glass. His eyes found me before I could look away. Not in the way other men looked. Not lingering. Not hungry. Assessing. Like he was reading a balance sheet, and I was a line item that didn't add up. I walked over with a tray balanced against my palm. Refill. My voice sounded steady, which felt like a small miracle. He didn't answer right away. His gaze dropped to my hands. I felt it like a touch even though he hadn't moved. My sleeve had shifted when I lifted the bottle. Just half an inch. Enough. His fingers closed gently around my wrist before I could step back. Not tight. Not painful. Just certain. The restaurant noise kept humming around us. But at our table, everything went still. His thumb brushed once against the inside of my arm where the makeup hadn't fully set. His jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "Who did this to you?" he asked. His voice was low, controlled, the kind of calm that makes your pulse trip over itself. I tried to pull back, but he didn't let go yet. "It's nothing," I said quickly. I hit a door. The lie tasted metallic. His eyes lifted to mine. Dark, focused, unmoved. He didn't argue, didn't raise his voice, didn't cause a scene. He just studied my face like he was memorizing it. Then, slowly, he released me and adjusted his cuff as if we'd been discussing the weather. "Doors can be dangerous," he said quietly. One of the men at the table shifted in his seat. Adrian didn't look at him. He looked at me, and something in that look made my breath catch. Not because I felt owned, not because I felt small, but because for the first time in a long time, I felt seen. I stepped back, nearly colliding with another server, my heart pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. I told myself it was over. Just a strange moment. Just another powerful man playing savior. But as I moved toward the kitchen, I caught a glimpse of Adrian lifting his phone, speaking softly into it, eyes never leaving my back. He hadn't asked for a name. He hadn't needed one. And deep in my chest, beneath the fear and the shame and the careful excuses, something else stirred. Not hope. Not yet. Just the unsettling certainty that by morning, the man who taught me to flinch would wake up in a city that no longer felt like his. The rest of my shift passed in a blur of polished silver and controlled breathing, but I felt it, the shift beneath the surface of the room, like a storm system moving in without thunder. Adrian Moretti did not look at me again, not openly, yet every time I crossed the floor, I sensed the weight of his awareness tracking my steps, measuring my posture, cataloging every flinch I tried to hide. When his table finally stood to leave, the other men moved first, chairs sliding back in careful unison, but he remained seated for a fraction longer, finishing his drink with deliberate calm. He did not rush. He never rushed. As he rose, he adjusted his jacket and spoke quietly to the man on his right. The man nodded once, his expression sharpening with purpose. Then they were gone, the heavy glass doors closing behind them with a muted thud that sounded too final for a simple exit. I told myself it meant nothing. Powerful men made calls all the time. Deals, contracts, reservations. The city ran on quiet conversations. I stayed until close, counting tips under the yellow glow of the service bar, my hands steadier than I expected. $1,100 in cash sat folded in my apron pocket. Enough to cover rent. Enough to make the night feel survivable. By the time I stepped outside, the air had turned cool, the kind of early spring chill that clung to bare skin and made the sidewalk shine under streetlights. Queens felt different after midnight. Not dangerous, exactly, just honest. No polished marble. No string quartet. Just cracked pavement and the hum of traffic in the distance. I wrapped my coat tighter and walked the 3 blocks to my apartment, listening to my own footsteps echo. When I opened the door, the television was on. Too loud. Ryan sat on the couch, leaning forward, elbows on his knees. He did not look drunk. That almost made it worse. "You are late," he said without turning around. It was not a question. I set my keys down carefully. It was busy. My voice stayed neutral, the way you speak to a skittish dog. He muted the television and finally looked at me. His eyes flicked to my wrist, then back to my face. For a second, something uncertain crossed his expression, like he could not quite place why the air felt different. I felt it too. I did not flinch this time. "You going to say it again?" he asked. "Say what?" "That it is nothing." I swallowed. The lie felt heavier tonight. Before I could answer, his phone buzzed on the coffee table. He glanced down, annoyed. Another buzz. Then another. His jaw tightened as he picked it up. The color drained from his face in slow increments, like someone dimming a light. "What is it?" I asked quietly. He did not respond. He was scrolling now, reading fast, thumb moving in sharp motions. A bead of sweat formed at his temple even though the apartment was cool. "That is not possible," he muttered. "They cannot just pull that." He stood abruptly, pacing the small living room. Words slipped out in fragments. "Account frozen. Audit. Partnership terminated." His boss not answering calls. I stayed by the door, coat still on, watching the unraveling happen without raised voices, without slammed fists. Just consequence unfolding like a spreadsheet recalculating in real time. He looked at me then, really looked at me, as if seeing me clearly for the first time in months. Suspicion flickered there, but it had nowhere to land. I had not made a single call. I had not left the restaurant before him. I had done nothing except exist under the wrong light at the wrong time. "What did you do?" he demanded, but the edge in his tone was thinner now. I felt my pulse slow, steady, almost calm. "I worked," I said. The truth had never sounded so simple. His phone buzzed again. He answered this time, voice dropping to a strained whisper. I caught pieces. Legal review. Investors backing out. Temporary suspension. By the time he hung up, his shoulders had sunk an inch lower. He did not look powerful anymore. He looked small. The city outside our window continued as usual, taxis gliding past, sirens far away, neon signs flickering. Nothing dramatic. No sirens at our door. No headlines screaming across the screen. Just a man realizing the ground beneath him was not as solid as he believed. I finally took off my coat and hung it by the door. My wrist ached faintly under the sleeve, but the bruise no longer felt like the loudest thing in the room. Somewhere across the river, in an office lined with glass and steel, I imagined Adrian Moretti standing at a window, watching the skyline he seemed to own. I imagined him lowering his phone, his expression unchanged, his voice still calm. He had not needed to threaten. He had not needed to shout. By midnight, the balance had shifted. By morning, everyone who mattered would understand why. And for the first time since the bruise had bloomed purple against my skin, I did not feel alone in my own apartment. Morning arrived without drama, which somehow made it feel heavier. The light through my apartment window was pale and indifferent, stretching across the worn hardwood floors like nothing had shifted overnight. Ryan had barely slept. I heard him pacing at 3 a.m, heard the low murmur of another call he took in the kitchen with the door half closed. Words like compliance review and internal investigation slipped under the frame and settled into the air between us. When I stepped out of the bedroom, he was already dressed, tie crooked, eyes rimmed red from more than lack of sleep. He did not yell. He did not accuse. He just stared at his phone as if waiting for it to apologize. I poured coffee into a chipped white mug and leaned against the counter. "Everything okay?" I asked, because it was the script we both knew. He let out a humorless laugh. "No. It is not okay. The investors pulled out. The board froze my access. They are acting like I am radioactive. He ran a hand through his hair, the frustration sharp but contained. This does not happen overnight. Someone made a call. The words hung there, unfinished, searching for a direction. His gaze drifted toward me again, slower this time. Calculating. I felt the urge to shrink, to make myself smaller, but I did not. I took a slow sip of coffee instead. You said it yourself, I replied quietly. These things do not happen overnight. He looked away first. That felt new. He left 20 minutes later, the door closing with a softer click than usual. The apartment exhaled after he was gone. I stood there for a long moment, listening to the hum of the refrigerator, the distant rumble of a bus stopping on the corner. My wrist throbbed faintly under the sleeve of my sweater, but the ache felt distant, like a memory instead of a warning. I checked my phone. No missed calls. No unknown numbers. Just a text from Maria asking if I could cover her shift on Sunday. Normal. Everything looked normal. By noon, the city was buzzing. Bellamy's had a lunch crowd, quieter but just as polished. I moved between tables with steady hands, refilling water glasses, clearing plates. A news alert flashed across the television above the bar. A brief headline about a financial probe involving a mid-level investment firm. No names mentioned, but I recognized the logo in the corner of the screen. My stomach tightened, not from fear, but from recognition. Precision. That was the word that came to mind. Not chaos. Not revenge. Precision. Around 1 o'clock, the front door opened, and the air shifted again. I did not need to look to know who had walked in. Adrian crossed the dining room with unhurried steps, sunlight catching in his dark hair. He wore a navy suit today, crisp and understated, the kind that whispered wealth instead of announcing it. He did not sit at his usual corner table. He chose one near the window instead, where the light fell directly across his face. When I approached, my pulse was steady in a way that surprised me. "Good afternoon," I said. He studied me for a second longer than necessary. His gaze flicked briefly to my wrist, fully covered now, then back to my eyes. "How are you feeling?" he asked. "Not about the bruise. About me." The distinction was subtle but deliberate. "I am fine," I answered, and this time it did not sound like a lie. A faint nod. Approval, maybe. Or acknowledgement. "Coffee," he said softly. I turned to retrieve it, aware of the quiet gravity around him. When I set the cup down, our fingers brushed for half a second. Warm. Steady. Controlled. He looked out the window toward the skyline across the river, then back at me. "Sometimes," he said evenly, "people forget that the city has a memory. It does not tolerate carelessness for long." His eyes held mine, not demanding, not possessive. Certain. I swallowed, understanding without needing details. "I did not ask for help," I whispered. "I know," he replied. There was no arrogance in it. Just fact. "But you deserved it." The words settled deep, heavier than any threat ever could. In the reflection of the glass behind him, I caught a glimpse of myself standing straighter than I had in months. And for the first time, the bruise felt like something that was already fading. The afternoon light stretched long across the restaurant floor, turning the polished wood into something almost golden, and I told myself that meant calm, that meant ordinary, that meant the world had not quietly tilted on its axis because one powerful man decided it should. Adrian finished his coffee slowly, as if time adjusted itself around him instead of the other way around. When he stood, he did not reach for his wallet. He never did. The check had already been handled before I could print it. Control moved ahead of him like a shadow. As he buttoned his jacket, he paused beside me, close enough that I could feel the faint warmth radiating from him, close enough that the subtle scent of clean cologne and something darker settled in my lungs. "You should not go home tonight," he said quietly. The words were not a command. They were a prediction. My pulse ticked once, sharp and sudden. "I live there," I replied. He studied my face the way he had the first night, as if measuring the difference between fear and denial. "That does not mean it is where you should be." I held his gaze. "You said I am safe." A faint shift in his expression, almost approval. "You are," he said evenly. "But safety is not always comfortable." Then he walked out, leaving the door to close behind him with the same muted finality as before. The rest of the shift moved in fragments. A spilled glass. A couple arguing softly over dessert. Maria whispering that something felt strange in the air. By the time I clocked out, The sky had darkened to deep blue, city lights flickering awake across the skyline. I stood on the sidewalk for a moment, weighing his warning against habit. Habit had kept me small. Habit had kept me quiet. I pulled out my phone and called my sister. "Can I stay over tonight?" I asked before I could change my mind. She did not hesitate. Of course. I did not go back to the apartment. I did not text Ryan. I did not leave a note. I told myself it was temporary, just a pause, just breathing room. But as the cab carried me toward Brooklyn, I felt something loosen in my chest that had been tight for months. At my sister's place, the air smelled like lavender detergent and takeout noodles. Simple. Safe. She asked questions, but I answered lightly, deflecting with tired smiles. I slept on her couch under a thin gray blanket, staring at the ceiling fan turning slow circles above me. Around 2 in the morning, my phone vibrated. Unknown number. I almost ignored it. Almost. Hello. Silence for half a second. Then Adrian's voice, low and composed. "You are not home." It was not a question. I sat up slowly, blanket falling to my waist. No, a pause, not of surprise, but of confirmation. Good. I swallowed. Did something happen? I asked, the words barely audible. Through the line, I could hear faint city noise, distant traffic, the hum of an engine idling. "Change," he said simply. "That is all." My mind flashed to Ryan's strained expression, the unanswered calls, the sudden unraveling of his carefully built confidence. "You did not have to do that," I whispered. "I know." He replied again, steady as ever. There was no triumph in his tone, no claim of ownership, just certainty. But I chose to. The honesty of it hit harder than any raised voice ever could. I pressed my free hand against my chest, feeling the slow rhythm of my heartbeat beneath my palm. Why? The question escaped before I could stop it. On the other end, I heard him exhale softly, as if the answer required no effort at all. "Because the city remembers," he said. "And so do I." The line went quiet after that, not abruptly, just complete. I lowered the phone and stared at the darkened room around me, the faint streetlight filtering through the blinds. Somewhere across the river, a man who controlled boardrooms and backrooms alike had decided that my pain was unacceptable. And for the first time, I understood something clearly. This was not about possession. It was about choice. And he had chosen me. 3 days passed without chaos, and that was how I knew the shift was permanent. Chaos makes noise. Power does not. The city continued its rhythm of taxis and sirens and late-night deliveries, but beneath it there was a new alignment, like the gears had clicked into place after grinding for too long. I moved back into my apartment during daylight, not because I was afraid of the dark, but because I wanted to see it clearly. Ryan was gone. Not dramatically, not violently, just gone. His suits were missing from the closet. His watch stand empty. The faint imprint on the couch cushion already rising back to shape. On the kitchen counter sat a single envelope with my name, written in hurried block letters. Inside was a short note. He said he needed space. He said things had become complicated. He said he did not recognize the direction his life had taken. I read it once and set it down. There was no apology. There did not need to be. The silence said enough. I opened the windows and let fresh air push through the rooms, carrying out whatever tension had clung to the walls. The bruise on my wrist had faded to a faint shadow, barely visible now. I traced it lightly with my fingertip, not as a reminder of pain, but as proof of endurance. That evening, I returned to Bellamy's for another shift, walking in through the front entrance instead of the side. Maria noticed immediately. "You look taller," she joked, nudging my shoulder. Maybe I did. Adrian arrived just after sunset, alone this time. No entourage, no visible guards. Just him in a slate gray suit that fit like it had been measured against his spine. He chose the corner table again, back to the wall, habit ingrained deeper than comfort. When I approached, I did not feel the old flicker of uncertainty. I felt balance. "Good evening," I said. He studied my face carefully, as if searching for something that had been missing before. "You are home," he said quietly. It was not a question. "Yes," I replied. "Alone." A subtle nod, approval without triumph. He folded his hands on the table, fingers relaxed. "He will not trouble you." The certainty in his tone was absolute, but there was no threat beneath it. Just finality. I met his gaze, steady. He already left. A faint shift crossed Adrian's features, something almost like satisfaction, but softer. Then you chose well, he said. The waiter in the corner dropped a fork, the sound sharp against the quiet hum of the dining room. Adrian did not flinch. Neither did I. You moved pieces, I said carefully, lowering my voice so only he could hear. Yes. He did not pretend otherwise. And if I had stayed? The question lingered between us, not confrontational, just curious. His eyes held mine, unblinking. Then I would have respected your decision, he answered. There was no hesitation in it. That was what unsettled me most. He had intervened, yes. He had shifted entire structures with a phone call. But he had never tried to steer my will, only the circumstances around it. I set his glass of water down gently. You do not own my choices, I said, not accusing, simply stating. A slow, measured breath left him. No, he agreed. I protect what stands on its own. The words landed deeper than any declaration of possession could have. Outside the window, headlights streaked across wet pavement from a brief evening drizzle. The city shimmered, restless and alive. Adrian leaned back slightly in his chair, posture relaxed but watchful. You are stronger than you think, he said, almost to himself. I felt the truth of it settle into my bones. Not because he said it, because I felt it. The fear that once lived just beneath my skin had quieted. Not erased, but transformed. As he stood to leave, he paused beside me, close enough that I could sense the contained force in him, the discipline that kept his world aligned. If you ever need the city to remember again, he said softly, you know where to find me. I held his gaze without shrinking. I do not need it to remember, I replied. Not anymore. And for the first time since this began, the power in the room did not feel like his alone. It was not the grand gestures that changed me. It was the quiet mornings. A week after Ryan left, I found myself waking before my alarm, sunlight spilling across my bedroom floor, the apartment still and undisturbed. No raised voices. No tension sitting heavy in the air. Just the faint hum of the refrigerator and the distant sound of traffic moving steadily toward Manhattan. I stood in front of my bathroom mirror and pushed my sleeve up without thinking. The bruise had almost disappeared now, a pale echo against my skin. I did not cover it. I did not hide it. I let it fade on its own time. At Bellamy's, the rhythm of work felt different too. Customers still argued over wine pairings. The chef still barked orders from behind the swinging doors. But when I walked across the dining room, I did not measure every step against someone else's mood. Maria noticed it again. You do not flinch anymore, she whispered as we polished glasses before dinner service. I smiled slightly. I did not realize I was. She gave me a look that said she had. That night, Adrian did not arrive until late. The restaurant had thinned to a soft murmur, candlelight flickering against the windows as rain streaked down the glass in thin silver lines. When he entered, there was no dramatic pause, no visible security, just a subtle shift in posture from the few patrons who recognized him. He carried the same contained gravity, but something in his expression seemed lighter, less guarded. I approached his table with steady hands. You are working too hard, he observed quietly as I set down his drink. It is an honest habit, I replied. His gaze lingered, not possessive, not demanding, just thoughtful. And what do you want, Claire? The question caught me off guard. No one had asked it in a long time. I opened my mouth to give a practical answer. More shifts. A promotion. Stability. But the words did not feel complete. I want peace, I said finally. It sounded simple. It felt enormous. Adrian leaned back slightly, considering that. Peace requires boundaries, he said. And courage. I held his gaze. I am learning. A faint smile touched his mouth, brief but real. You already have. The rain intensified outside, tapping softly against the glass like a steady heartbeat. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The silence was not uncomfortable. It felt earned. Around us, the city moved with its usual urgency, but at that table, time seemed measured differently. People are watching, I said quietly, nodding toward a corner booth where two men sat pretending not to look in our direction. Adrian did not turn his head. Let them, he replied. They need to understand that strength does not shout. The words resonated deeper than I expected. I realized then that what he had done for me was not about ownership or dominance. It was about alignment. A correction made without spectacle. When he stood to leave, he did not make a promise this time. He did not offer protection. Instead, he paused beside me and said, the city will test you again. It tests everyone. I met his eyes, steady and unafraid. Then I will stand. He nodded once, as if that was the only answer he required. After he left, I stepped outside for a breath of fresh air, the rain cool against my skin. The streets glistened under streetlights, reflections stretching long and bright across the pavement. I did not feel small anymore. I did not feel like something fragile that needed shielding. I felt rooted, strong in a way that did not depend on who stood beside me. Somewhere across the skyline, powerful men were recalculating their positions, adjusting to new realities. But here, under the steady rhythm of rain and traffic, I understood something clearly. He had shifted the world around me once. The rest was mine to hold. The next test did not arrive with thunder. It arrived with a knock. 3 weeks after the rain-soaked night outside Bellamy's, I was locking up the restaurant when Marco hurried toward me, his face pale beneath the kitchen lights. "There are men outside asking about you," he whispered, glancing toward the front windows. My pulse did not spike the way it used to. It sharpened, yes, but it did not fracture. I stepped out onto the sidewalk with my coat draped over my arm, the evening air crisp and cool against my skin. 2 men stood near the curb beside a black sedan, not Adrian's usual car, but close enough in tone to signal association. Their suits were dark, tailored, their posture disciplined. One of them inclined his head respectfully. "Miss Bennett," he said. "Not a question. Mr. Moretti would like a word." I looked at the street behind them, at the steady flow of traffic and the glow of streetlights reflecting off polished hoods and taxi roofs. "Is something wrong?" I asked. "No," the man replied evenly. "But there are conversations happening tonight that concern you." I considered that for a long second. Old instincts told me to hesitate. New ones told me to assess. "Where?" I asked. The sedan door opened smoothly. The drive across the river was quiet, the skyline rising ahead of us in glass and steel. We stopped in front of a building I had only ever seen from the outside, its lobby lined with marble and soft gold lighting. The elevator ride to the top floor felt suspended in silence. When the doors opened, Adrian was waiting near a wall of windows that overlooked the city. He did not turn immediately. His reflection met mine in the glass first. "You came," he said softly. "I do not scare easily anymore," I replied. That earned a faint curve at the corner of his mouth. He gestured toward the view. Manhattan, stretched out beneath us, endless and restless. "There are men who believe I move too quickly," he said calmly. "They believe emotion influenced strategy." I folded my arms loosely, feeling the steady rhythm of my own breathing. "Did it?" He turned then, facing me fully. "Yes." The honesty of it settled into the room like a weight. "And does that make you vulnerable?" I asked. His eyes held mine, unwavering. "Only if I deny it." For a moment, neither of us spoke. The city lights flickered against the glass, reflections layered over reflections. "Why bring me here?" I asked quietly. "Because they think you are leverage," he answered. "Not dramatic, not exaggerated, just fact." My spine straightened instinctively. "And are they right?" A pause. Measured. Deliberate. "No," he said. "You are not leverage. You are a choice." The distinction mattered. I stepped closer to the window, the height dizzying but grounding at the same time. "Then let them see me," I said. Not hidden, not afraid. Adrian watched me carefully, as if recalibrating something he had already calculated. "You understand what that means?" he said. I nodded once. "It means I stand on my own." A slow breath left him, almost imperceptible. He moved to stand beside me, not in front, not shielding. "Beside. They will test that," he warned. "So will I," I replied softly. The admission surprised even me. His gaze shifted, something warmer beneath the steel. "Good," he said. The tension in the room did not vanish, but it transformed. It was no longer about protection. It was about alignment. After a moment, he reached for his phone and sent a brief message. No explanation. No display. Just quiet confirmation. "They will adjust," he said simply. I looked out over the city again, the vast grid of light and motion, and felt something steady settle deep in my chest. Not fear. Not dependence. Resolve. When I finally turned toward the elevator, Adrian's voice followed me, low and certain. "The city remembers strength." I glanced back, meeting his eyes without hesitation. "So do I," I said. And this time, I meant myself. The meeting ended without applause, without raised voices, without spectacle. It ended the way power often does, in silence. I rode the elevator down alone, my reflection steady in the mirrored walls, the city lights flickering across my face as if testing whether I would blink. I did not. Outside, the night air felt sharper, cooler, cleaner against my skin. The black sedan waited, engine humming softly, but I waved it off. "I will walk," I said. The driver hesitated for half a second before nodding. The streets of Manhattan at night have their own rhythm. Footsteps echo between buildings. Taxi horns cut through conversations. Steam rises from grates in slow white spirals. I walked 12 blocks before realizing I was smiling. Not because I had won something. Not because someone had fought for me. But because I had stood in a room where men measured influence in millions and did not feel smaller. The next evening at Bellamy's, the air felt different again. Not tense. Observant. Word travels fast in this city, especially when it moves through quiet channels. Conversations paused when I crossed the dining room, not out of pity, not out of scandal, but curiosity. I carried myself the same way I always had, tray balanced on my palm, shoulders relaxed. But inside, something had anchored deeper. Adrian arrived later than usual. No entourage, no announcement, just the subtle shift of energy that followed him like a current. He chose the window table again. When I approached, our eyes met in that brief, unspoken exchange that had become familiar. "How was your walk?" he asked softly. I set down his glass of water, allowing myself the smallest hint of amusement. "Long enough to think," I replied. And his tone carried genuine interest, not interrogation. I folded my hands lightly in front of me. "You built a world where men fear losing position," I said carefully. "But you do not build it with fear. You build it with consequence." A faint flicker crossed his expression, something between respect and recognition. "Fear is unstable," he said. "Consequence is permanent." I nodded once. "Then let them understand this clearly." I continued, lowering my voice. "I am not your weakness." He held my gaze, steady and unwavering. "I never believed you were," he said. But they needed to see it. The restaurant noise swelled briefly around us. Laughter from a corner booth, the clink of silverware, a burst of applause for a birthday celebration. Life continuing. Adrian leaned back slightly, studying me with that quiet intensity that had once unsettled me. Now it steadied me. "You have changed," he observed. I allowed myself a slow breath. "No," I said gently. I stopped shrinking. The truth of it settled between us like something solid and undeniable. He did not reach for my hand. He did not claim me. He simply inclined his head, an acknowledgement that felt heavier than any grand declaration. When he stood to leave, he paused beside me one last time. "The city will remember this," he said quietly. I met his eyes without hesitation. "So will I." He stepped toward the door, and the room shifted subtly in response, as it always did. But this time, when the glass doors closed behind him, the shift did not feel like something happening to me. It felt like something I was part of. Later that night, after the last table cleared and the lights dimmed, I stepped outside alone. The skyline shimmered across the river, endless and electric. I flexed my wrist, the skin smooth and unmarked now, the bruise only a memory. Once, I had measured safety by silence. Now I measured it by choice. He did not raise his voice. He did not need to. He lowered the world around the man who thought he could make me small. And in the quiet that followed, I learned something stronger than protection. I learned how to stand.